Hey guys, thanks again for joining us for our Holy Week Recap podcast, where we take just a little bit of time and explain in the best detail we can in a condensed amount of time what's happening in the last week of the life of Christ. And we see so much happen in about 5 days that it is impossible to unpack all this on a 15-minute podcast. But thankfully, on Sunday mornings, we're journeying through the book of Mark. And so even after Easter, join us on Sundays at 9 or 11:15, and we will get much more detail. And you can click right back here on the YouTube channel. If you hit the like and subscribe, you'll get notifications when we post a sermon recap that goes into a lot more detail on these passages. Pastor, we left off yesterday with coming out of a big day full of a lot of stuff, where
Huge
Jesus,
day. Yeah.
Jesus just... He's coming out of changing or flipping the tables. He explains the fig tree, goes on to give a bunch of examples of how you have to trust God, even when life doesn't make sense, and even when it's hard. And we discussed yesterday the importance of why theology matters, why our knowledge of Scripture matters in the moments where the rug is pulled out from under us, our world is flipped upside down, and we may not, be able to solve it, but we can trust. And so then we move into Wednesday, and we see an enormous lack of trust by one that Jesus called his own, and that was Judas.
That's why it's called Spy Wednesday. So Holy Wednesday, sometimes referred to as Spy Wednesday. If you want to read and hit pause, it's Mark chapter 14. You can read verses 1 through 11 is what we're going to really be focusing on here. But this is a famous passage. A lot of people I know, this is their favorite passage, and so the chief priests and the scribes, they want him dead, but they're not as obvious right now. So they don't want Jesus just quiet; they want him dead, and they had decided they were going to kill him after the Passover because they were afraid of all the people in town that were going to riot.
It would have been a revolt.
It would have been a massive revolt. For sure. And so, meanwhile, Jesus is at the home of one of his disciples, a guy named, what was it, Simon the leper, I think it was, yeah. And so he's at this disciple's house, and
Not one of the 12.
not that Simon, not Peter. And there's a woman named Mary there, and she had that vial of perfume. And so Jesus is there, and she breaks open the vial and anoints him with it.
Now, is this Mary Magdalene?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Mark doesn't tell.
Yeah. He leaves out detail. Mark, he wants you to focus on the point. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And he gets very particular about what point he wants you to focus on, as opposed to Mark, Luke, and John, Matthew, Luke, and John. Man, they give a lot more detail. Mark he's like, I want you to laser focus on something. And so, so she takes the perfume, breaks the alabaster container, and anoints Jesus with it. Judas is infuriated.
Well, and here, why? Because he's the treasurer of the
money
bunch.
purse.
Yeah, he's the money guy. So he's keeping count and tabs of the funding of Jesus' ministry. And a lot of people, scholars will argue that Mary Magdalene was helping to fund that, for her to break open a vial of perfume.
Is that highly expensive perfume
is equal
bottle.
to a day's wages.
Is equal to a
year's wages. Yeah, I'm sorry.
So for some people's salary, that would have been a year's income. Yeah. So I don't know what an average median income is in the state where you live, but let's say it's $50,000. It'd be a $50,000 bottle of perfume. So Judas gets mad because he's like, hang on, we could have sold that and taken the money to either feed the poor or fund the ministry. Yeah. And the reality is he was the money keeper. He wanted to just pilfer it. Sure. And so he was not one of faith following Jesus. It's like he was a spy among them. And so he gets really upset. Jesus responds and essentially says, what she has done is right. What she has done is worship.
She has done a good deed to me.
You're always going to have the poor among you. You will not always have me. She has anointed me in preparation for the sacrifice is basically what he's getting at.
Yeah, Mark says she has anointed my body beforehand for the burial.
Yeah, so Jesus is trying to correct some bad understanding of Judas, but Judas gets so mad that he basically says, okay, you want to go to the cross? You want to be killed? I'll take care of that. So Judas runs off and creates a deal, gets a deal, makes a deal with the leaders.
The chief priests and
they purchase. So they basically set up a way where they pay him 30 pieces of silver, and the deal is you deliver Jesus, we'll bring the mob and we'll arrest.
Interesting note that Mark says, and I don't remember reading this in any of the other gospel accounts. Verse 11, they were glad when they heard this. That the chief priests were glad when Judas said, hey, I'll sell him out. And they promised to give him money, and he began seeking how to betray him at the opportune time.
And to understand the gravity and the pain and the suffering and the emotionally Jesus would have gone through, you have to have been betrayed by somebody you trust before. And it's extremely painful. The closer a person is, the more painful their betrayal is.
Sure.
And I think most people have a betrayal story of some sort. Certainly those who have gone through adultery and the intense emotional pain that comes from that. Or even folks, I was once horribly betrayed by someone that I considered a friend, someone that I trusted completely, only to have found out that much like this Judas story, very much like the Judas story, he had been giving one face to me, even blatantly lying to my face of what he felt should happen and how we should do it. And then I found out he had been going in these behind closed doors meetings with pockets of people, creating a completely fabricated story. And he even had some co-conspirators. And I was completely unaware because I trusted, I believed. We had, worked together for a handful of years at that point. Yeah. And then to find out that he had been betraying me all along. Now, the hurt that I felt was not like I wanted to go into a corner and cry. It wasn't like that. It was a shock, a disappointment, and it honestly made me feel bad for him. I felt like, wow, he's not the human that I thought he was, to have been so incredibly deceptive and dishonest, and it was a well-orchestrated betrayal, truly. I mean, there were, honestly, it's going to sound crazy, but there were like PowerPoint presentations that he had put together that accidentally got emailed to me. It was bizarre, but the betrayal that my wife and I, over the next couple of years, began to find out about and unfold, it just, it was painful. So when I think about, okay, this is with Jesus. Now, this is for his life, right? So this is someone who not only did Jesus trust, but he was going to lay his life down for Judas anyway, had this not happened. But now Judas is betraying him to the death that he was
subsequently betrays the other 11.
Yeah, it was awful. Yeah. So betrayal is painful. Jesus went through a betrayal. You almost wonder, too, why would there have had to be a betrayal in the story of Christ? Like, why would God say, we're going to make sure this betrayal takes place? Because you see it prophesied in the Old Testament. Yeah. And so there was a fulfillment of prophecy. But, I think part of the reason God allowed the betrayal to be part of the story of the cross is so that everyone can say, Jesus has experienced what I've experienced.
Yeah, what does Scripture say? He's a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, understands our deepest pain and longing. And I think, too, for me at least, Judas's betrayal highlights the ploy of the enemy.
Yeah.
To where rarely will the enemy attack you from the outside in, because he knows it's not as effective. Whether it's a church or whether it's a person, those betrayals you feel are never from someone who's on the peripheral of your life. They're always from someone who's deeply a part of you and a part of your life, whether it be a spouse or a best friend or a family member, or whomever it may be.
It's painful.
It's very painful. And I think this highlights the ploy of Satan to attack followers of Christ from the inside rather than the outside, because you can see that coming. You can see this coming. Of course, Jesus in his sovereignty knew, his omnipotence knew, but the disciples didn't see it coming.
Yeah, and that's what happens with Judas here too. I mean, you think, okay, what triggered this final act of betrayal for Judas? Well, it was greed, it was envy, it was all these things. And that's part of the component of this Holy Wednesday, Spy Wednesday, is Judas was disgusted by what he thought was the money, the value being wasted on Jesus. And it's because he missed the value of Jesus. So he saw anything going to Jesus as a waste. So.
And that's a good lesson for us, that we cannot place more value on stuff, on even good things, more than we place on Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever those idols are in our life, whether it's greed, pride, sometimes it's family, sometimes it's job, sometimes it's the work of the ministry. Whatever those idols are, no one will take the place of Jesus. No thing will take the place of Jesus.
I think these are the two key takeaways of today's message. I mean, don't make sure you're not valuing anything over the value of Christ.
Yep.
And also when God brings something painful into your life, there's a greater purpose for it all.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. That wraps up Spy Wednesday. Join us tomorrow as we look at the Last Supper and are we one day closer to the cross. Thanks for joining us.